Okie doke. We're going to look at the amines now. Now the amines have the functional group of NH2, like this. Okay, now all of the same naming rules apply, so meth, F, prop, but, pent, and so on and so on and so on. We'll start with the simplest. One carbon, or one methyl group. Okay, so we've got a methyl group and the amine functional group. Okay, this you can call either methyl amine or methylamine or methylamine or methanamine, and like that. Okay, so that's the simplest form of amine. What you might notice is on the nitrogen's got two hydrogens bonded to it and it's bonded to a methyl group. Therefore, there are two or a pair of unbonded electrons. Okay, and we'll talk about what that means for the types of properties that amines possess in a little bit. Let's move on to naming something a little bit more complicated. What about, look at something like this, eh? Alrighty. Now here, we still apply our same naming rules, right? We've got 3 carbons in our chain, therefore we're looking at a prop. Right. Our amine functional group is attached here, it's bonded to the second carbon, so 2, and then amine. So you're looking at propan-2-amine. This one, okay? So all the standard naming rules apply. Let's look at something slightly different. Okie doke. Let's have a look at primary, secondary, and tertiary amines. Okay, now a primary amine is what we looked at before. First, something like methylamine is a primary amine. Okay, the reason is because the amine group, functional group, only has one methyl group attached to it. It's only got one carbon attached to it, and that's this one here. Right, so that is a primary amine. A secondary amine might be something like this. There we got CH3N. Maybe we put CH3 here and H like that. Okay. Always remember when we're drawing amines to label the unbonded electrons or non-bonding electrons. This is a secondary amine. Okay. The reason it's a secondary amine is because we have got 2 methyl groups attached to the nitrogen. Okay. So that's a secondary amine. 2 carbons attached to our nitrogen. Let's have a look at a tertiary amine. Just make some space. And you probably guessed it. We're looking at an amine group with amine functional group with 3 carbons attached to it, or 3 methyl groups attached to it. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3. This is a tertiary amine. Alright, now let's look at how we can name secondary and a tertiary amine. Let's do ethyl. We'll do ethylamine. Alright. And let's do a secondary amine. Like this. Okay, so our carbon chain here is ethyl. Alright. So we're looking at ethanamine here, because we've got an ethyl attached to our amine. Now, the amine, this time it's secondary, it's got a second carbon attached to it. Right? So this is a methyl group that's bonded to our amine. So if you have a methyl group bonded to your amine, to show where the methyl group is and that it is attached to the nitrogen, you have to label this as N-methyl. Okay? So this is called N-methyl ethanamine. Okay? So because we've got a methyl group attached to our nitrogen, you need to label this N-methyl so that from the name you know where to put that methyl group. Okay? That's for secondary amines. Let's look at naming something a bit more complex. We'll look at a tertiary amine. We'll do the same tertiary amine. Let's look at ethanamine again, but we'll just make it tertiary this time. So we've got still CH3, CH2. And we've still got our amine group. So this is tertiary. Okay, but this time we're going to have two methyls attached to the amine. Okay, so we're still looking at ethan. Amine. This time round we have got two methyl groups attached to the nitrogen. Okay, so when you're naming this, you need to note where the methyl groups are. We've got an N-methyl and an N-methyl because they're both attached. I've made a mistake. Right. Because there's two methyl groups, you need to call it dimethyl. And it's N-dimethyl ethanamine. Okay. So, the first N is telling us that one of the methyl groups is attached to the nitrogen, and the second N is telling us that another methyl group is attached to the nitrogen. Okay. So it's when the methyl groups replace these two hydrogens, right? That's when you have to make note of it by including an N in the name. Okay, and that's naming amines.